Namaste, Suprabhatam. Am I audible to everyone? Am I audible?
Yes.
We are very, very fortunate to have Michel Danino ji amongst us for the day 2 of the session under the theme India's Knowledge Systems, Perspectives, Culture, Context and Imperative. Today we have 2 themes. This theme is continuing from yesterday, and this is the 5th session under this theme. And then from the next session, we move to another theme. The session for today is What are India's Knowledge Systems by none other than Professor Michel Danino. I'm sure all of us would have heard his name, his contributions to the field of IKS. He's a visiting professor from the Institute of Technology, Gandhi Nagar. And Dr. Michel Danino, please, slide please. Could we go to the next slide, please? A very brief introduction. Professor Michel is a guest lecturer at IIT Gandhi Nagar. He's been a former member of the Indian Council of Historical Research. He's authored The Lost River on the Trail of the Saraswati, and he's been conferred the Padma Shri for his contributions in literature. That's a very, very brief introduction to Professor Danino. And Professor Danino, welcome to this session. We have 40 faculty who have registered from various colleges and universities as part of the career advancement scheme under the UGC-HRDC, that is the upper cap number. And we also have these recordings, these sessions live stream, wherein people can watch it from any part of the world. Welcome, Professor Danino, once again. The floor is all yours.
Namaste, Dr. Richaji, and all the organizers at Rashtram of this week-long, or is it fortnight-long event of great importance. This is a field I have been associated with for quite some years, of course, I feel very awkward speaking after all the luminaries you had yesterday, and I am sure I will not be able to add much to what they said. I will simply speak basically from my experience, my own reflections, and then trying to look at the way forward in brief. I would like to first of all ask, why do we have to speak of Indian knowledge systems at all after 74 years of independence? This is, I think, the question we should start reflecting upon. There is a great paradox here that scholars all over the world have documented, discussed, admired India's contributions in quite a lot of fields, from the most abstruse philosophical fields to very practical technological fields. The range is so vast, and I will briefly touch upon this. But how come that this whole wealth of knowledge was completely kept out of the purview of the educational system after independence? I see messages, but I'm not muted, and I hope I'm audible. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Dr.
Dr. Machino. Yes, Dr.
Thank you. So this is the great paradox of independent India, that while a number of freedom fighters, even before freedom fighters, figures like Swami Vivekananda, and then, of course, later on, Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, and many others highlighted the need for a national system of education. It's only now that we have a national education policy, and it's extremely strange that there was no rethinking of the educational system immediately after independence. So this is a kind of great weakness that India showed in not being able to look at what should be the true foundations of an independent nation. And those two foundations had been already discussed and proposed by a large number of freedom fighters. So that I will not dwell upon further, but there is this paradox and we are still addressing it after 74 years. So this is an aberration. Before I proceed, I would like first of all to point out that today happens to be the International Students' Day. I actually did not know of its existence because we celebrate the Teachers' Day, as you know, on September 5, which I always tell my students jokingly that it should be a Students' Day and not a Teachers' Day, because without students, there is no teacher. But I did not know, and I just discovered through a friend this morning that 17th of November is the International Students' Day, marked by a fairly grim event in 1941 when Nazi Germany executed a number of students in Czechoslovakia protesting against its invasion of their country. And to mark this execution and deportation of hundreds of students to concentration camps, this was, after the war, proposed to become the International Students' Day. I'm not sure we celebrate it in India, but anyway, let me evoke this because we're no longer executing students, but we almost are. You know, there are 5,000 to 6,000 student suicides every year in India, and many of them are the victims of the educational system. So as my distinguished friend and mentor, Professor Kapil Kapoor, whose birthday is today, incidentally, it is his birthday also today. So we have a double quota of auspiciousness today. But as he often quotes, the art critic Ananda Kumaraswamy used to speak of English-educated Indians way back in the 1920s, 1930s as the victims of the Indian education system. This, for him, was a system that completely uprooted Indians from their culture, and we are continuing to do this. But there are also victims in a much more physical sense of the education system, and these are our students forced to accept a very repressive, a very limiting, a very dehumanizing system of learning, which is the opposite of what a true education should have been. So these are some of my preliminary thoughts as I look at the whole scene, and we are, of course, we're hoping that we are at a turning point, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that we can make up for lost time. We will not be able to make up for the lost generations of Indian students who have come out of the system with a profound ignorance of their cultural roots. So let me perhaps use a few slides as illustration. I have not had time, I will confess, to prepare a very systematic, well-organized presentation. This is going to be a little bit rambling, but I just want to share some of my thoughts and experience, and then perhaps, hopefully, we can engage in some discussion together after. So I will share my screen. And I hope that this slide is visible.
Yes, Professor Danino. Yes,
So
yes,
I've slightly changed the title from what are Indian knowledge systems, because if we really have to ask what are Indian knowledge systems, it would imply that we are also equally ignorant. I don't think we need to define them. We know what they are. We know that India organized, codified its knowledge. You see here from Khajuraho temple, you see the scene of an acharya teaching his students. Some of them, the ones who are seated here, are quite senior. You see, they have a beard. Others, younger ones, are standing. There are also women students listening and also learning. One of them here has under her arm a takti. A takti is, you know, in North India, it used to be what was the slate in Europe, a piece of wood where you could write and then, of course, erase. Very economical and used since Harappan times in India. And so she's a student. They are all students. Incidentally, this is oral education. Nobody is writing anything. There are other depictions elsewhere where we do see teaching going on through manuscripts, but here it's a complete oral teaching. So, this is just to remind us that there is a long tradition of learning and teaching, and India is possibly the one culture in the world where knowledge was divinized, knowledge was deified. It became Goddess Saraswati in the course of time. So we're supposed to revere knowledge. We have not done much more than lip service to it after independence. And of course, education went spiraled down to no more than preparation to the job market. We know that. So therefore, instead of asking what are Indian knowledge systems, I'm going to just look at their potential place in the educational scene. And for this, and here you see, by the way, on the right of the screen, you see a small figurine of terracotta dated to 1 or 2 centuries BCE, where you have a child, whether male or female is very hard to say. You have a child pointing to a takti, the same takti that this lady student has under her arm. And on this takti are letters of Brahmi script, Brahmi letters. And the child is proudly pointing to these letters. So this is roughly 2,000-year-old, maybe a little less, doesn't matter, figurine where we see, you know, again, how education is valued. And one of the means of education, which is in this case, script and writing. So it's a long tradition. And let us instead ask this question of what should have been, but I think there is a mistake in my slide. I had wanted a slightly different order, so I'm just going to take half a minute to correct this. Otherwise, my argument is not. Yes. I wanted to keep this for a little later after showing you some examples of the aberration I was referring to. So this is where we were. And again, I hope that my slides are visible. I'm just going to show you some symptoms, very, very few, just 2 or 3 symptoms of what happens. And I begin with this example, which is an existing curriculum for an MSc mathematics paper in Bangalore University, one of the supposedly better government universities in India, and an old one. And there is a Department of Mathematics having, of course, an MSc program in mathematics. And here you have one paper on the history of mathematics, which is welcome because usually there will not even be that. And students of mathematics or any science are straight away fed with the results, with the formulas, which is completely against any organic sort of learning, since you should understand at least something of the chain of ideas that led to this result. But instead, we just jump into the result and have to learn them by heart without understanding the whole background. So at least there was an attempt here to give such a background, which is welcome. But what we see strangely is that, okay, apart from the chronological order, when the paper begins with some of the great European mathematicians of the 18th, 19th century and so on, that is all right. You need not follow a chronological order, but then from there, it jumps to the Greeks. As you can see, we are now with the Greeks. Here, then we go to the Arabs. All right, that is to some extent understandable. And then we jump back to Europe with Descartes and with the proper invention of calculus through Leibniz and Newton and Fermat and so on. And then this continues. I'm sorry, with European mathematics. And it goes on and on till the very recent period. In other words, India is completely absent from this picture. So this is equivalent to, let us say, in a Greek university in Greece, having a paper on history of mathematics and no mention of Greek accomplishments in the past. Can we conceive of this? Certainly not. It's not going to happen in Greece. It's not going to happen in any other parts of the world, except in India. So this is an example of the complete blindness that that our own educators have in this field, and it's the same in every other field. So the intention was good. The completely Western oriented, because China also is missing. China did quite a lot of mathematics. So the complete, hypnosis with Western knowledge is going to actually misrepresent the whole field and prejudice students against if they hear later of Indian accomplishments in mathematics, they will be highly skeptical because they say, no, we didn't learn them at the MSc level. So this is one example I wanted to start with. And then this other from a school level textbook, where we see, again, with good intentions, in a physics textbook, we see something about atoms and how the atomic theory was first envisaged before physics, modern physics, could really work it out. And the intention again is good, but we have to refer to the Greeks, and which is perfectly fine, and we have to know what the Greeks did, and we have to know what every other culture came up with. But what about India? What about the Indian concept of atom in, for example, Vaisheshika Shastra and a few more fields where the concept of Paramanu was spelled out? And there's a whole theory about it. That theory is not very, very compatible with modern physics, but it doesn't matter. Neither was the Greek theory compatible with modern physics. These are antecedents. We need to understand them. And therefore, why should we keep Indian accomplishments out of the picture. There are deeper prejudices, and I'm going to show you these. I hope this slide comes out all right here. So this is from an otherwise excellent textbook produced by NCERT on, just a second, I'm sorry. Yeah, but there was, yes, this is what I wanted to show, first of all. Some of the colonial stereotypes in our textbooks. And this is what this extract will show, that first of all, Indian crafts came from outside. This is totally absurd because we have plenty of evidence of crafts right from the Harappan times and even before, even in prehistoric times, we see a lot of crafts developing from bead making to weaving to pottery to all kinds of ornaments and so on. So to say that India learned her crafts from outside is absurd. It's again a kind of example of slavish mindset. Secondly, the accusation, the charge, as we will see now, that the caste system is responsible for stagnation in knowledge and in occupation, that people could not would not have access to education, which is easy to disprove, and would not be able to change their occupation, which is equally easy to disprove, because there's plenty of evidence through inscriptions, through the text, of caste mobility in ancient times, much more than in the medieval, or even much worse in the colonial times, when the British census and other statements on caste completely rigidified the system. This is well known to modern scholarship, but we continue to peddle those old colonial prejudices as if they were, the ultimate knowledge of India. And then also this other falsehood of a divorce between tribal and classical, here in the field of crafts, but in pretty much every other field. And this is again in complete disregard of the evidence of massive interchange, exchange of knowledge systems, exchange of practices, exchange of local understanding of the environment between the so-called tribal communities, basically the forest dwellers, the mountain dwellers, and the mainstream society, which did not regard those tribal communities as distinct from it. It's only the environmental setting which differs, but otherwise, as the very distinguished anthropologist K.S. Singh showed and repeated at great length, in ancient times, there is no word for tribe. Tribals are simply janas. They are just janas like any other jana, and they are not regarded as being outside of the society. They just live in some degree of isolation. So now coming to this particular textbook, this is the extract which I had prepared, where this is from NCERT, where you can see at the top here that the influences as far as craft is concerned came to India from multiple sources. So some came from the Silk Route, others came from the Middle East, from Central Asia, etc. And therefore, basically, it all came from outside. This is the implied message. Secondly, we see here that the static nature of the Hindu caste system, and this staticity exists only in the writer's imagination, has kept many craft forms alive merely because the artisan had no opportunity to move away to other professions. This is complete rubbish, and this is what we teach our young Indians. Lastly, here you see the tribal and indigenous art related to specific cultural traditions of various communities, and this could be called people's art as opposed to the more stylized classical arts that evolve within the Hindu social system. This is again a deep misunderstanding of this, Marga Deshi interaction, this constant flow back and forth between the classical, the Marga, and the regional, the Deshi. And this is something that has enriched both parts of the spectrum. So these are the kinds of prejudices that we have to fight against. So now finally I come to this discussion, and I want here to simply sum up the picture where we can see the ignorance in all these fields, whether it is the sciences, civil engineering, agriculture, ecology and environment, which becomes so crucial nowadays, medicine, philosophy, psychology, political science, education, business and management, physical education. In all of these fields, there is massive production of knowledge from the most ancient times all the way to the pre-colonial and sometimes even colonial periods. And yet almost none of it figures in the education system, neither at school nor also at the college level. I showed you an example just now in mathematics. If you look at the curriculums of, let us say, departments of philosophy in India, it is very, very largely Western philosophy. There will be sometimes one or two papers on some Indian systems like Vedanta, but not a complete view at all of India's contributions in the field. The same thing again with regard to psychology, where India's systems of yoga, for example, yoga is nothing but self-exploration, self-fulfillment, they hardly figure at all. And in political science also, you will start with, the modern concept of nation state from the French Revolution onward, and not even looking, most of the time, there can be a few exceptions, and there are luckily growing number of exceptions, but we are still far from an ideal situation. But mostly you will find that the ancient systems of governance and polity are completely ignored. I remember still, and I think Professor Kapil Kapoor was present when we had a workshop in Gujarat, where many years ago, perhaps about 10 years ago, we were trying to work with a number of university professors to add some Indian content to their field. And there was a head of Department of Political Science in one of the universities who was with us. And, we were telling him that, why don't you include things from Arthashastra, the concept of the state and governance and rule, and from many other Niti Shastras and so on. And his reply was simply that, why do you mention this anyway? There was no democracy in India before independence. And I had to reply to him that, I'm sorry, but if you give me your email address, I'll send you half a dozen papers on democratic structures and functionings in ancient India. So he gave me his email address. I sent him the papers, and I never heard of him again. Because, this is the case of, I would say, 3/4 of our faculty strength in higher education are so profoundly ignorant that they cannot even question themselves. They're not even open to fresh knowledge, because it means that, they have to question the whole foundation of their trajectory, their career, and the kind of, sphere of knowledge that they feel comfortable in. So this is the kind of aberration that we have and continue to have. And these are on the column on the right, where I show, but very briefly and imperfectly, and I'm not even trying to elaborate at this point, because I think it's quite obvious to all of you, where I showed what could be done in integrating all the way to physical education through yoga, martial arts, wrestling, and so on, where we could integrate some elements of this wealth of the past knowledge. Now, this is all very fine, but we have to look at some of the practical aspects of it. So first of all, why should we integrate Indian knowledge system? So one objection will be that, anyway, they are obsolete. So this is good for scholars. You can dwell on the past if you have time, but we have to be realistic. We have to prepare our children for jobs, and how is this going to help them? It's going to help them immensely, and even for jobs, because we have so many of our students, and I see them all the time, jumping into jobs being totally unprepared to face the challenges of life. And then they crash into a wall sooner or later. So the question is, whether we want to produce people who are well equipped, not only in knowledge, but in their own personality, in their understanding of life, in their understanding of the environment, and so on. So I have spelled out here those benefits of teaching Indian knowledge system. First of all, this sense that you belong to a certain stream of civilization. You are just a continuation of it. You're not an isolated individual, like an island in time and space. You're part of that stream which has produced so much knowledge, and much of which, traveled abroad. And this is something that automatically will give you tremendous confidence that you can stand on your own feet. It's not a question of pride. It's not a question of even patriotism. I'm not interested in those notions. I just say, learn something of what is there, get a sense of what was there, get an understanding rather than, a myriad of facts about what was there, and automatically you feel, that you can stand at a level with any other culture. You can dialogue with Chinese or American people and not have any sense of inferiority, which we continue to have, of course. Secondly, we will be able to appreciate Indian civilization as a creative one, and not like this NCERT textbook shows us, as a kind of regressive, static, stagnant, caste-ridden society. There was a lot of very important things that happened which we have very little idea about. So we need a more objective appreciation of India. We speak a lot nowadays of multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, teaching and project. It's not happening much. These are just nice labels, but I teach in an IIT, and there are some attempts. This IIT in Gandhi Nagar takes pride, in fact, in promoting a lot of interdisciplinary research. Yeah, some of it perhaps, but we remain compartmentalized. So here we will benefit from this cross-disciplinary training, because all those ancient disciplines in India were connected deeply together. For example, if you study ancient Indian mathematics, you will easily move to poetry and philosophy, because many of those mathematicians were also poets and philosophers. So you will have maybe touches here and there, and you will understand that it all moves together. Or if you study water structures, for example, which we should do at an engineering level, because the ancient water structures were excellently designed most of the time, and still have great lessons for us. And some people do try to turn back to them to understand their working principles. But at the same time, we see that many of them have a whole spiritual background. Those magnificent step wells, the temple tanks, reservoirs. You have very, very often, intertwined with the engineering aspect. You have a kind of sacred background, which reminds us that we must look at the environment and all its elements, water in this case, but in another case, it will be a river, it will be a mountain, it will be animals. We should look at all these elements as part of a whole sacred totality, which we should, be in harmony with. And this is a message which, of course, is becoming more and more needed day by day. So this is one small illustration of this cross-disciplinary thinking, which becomes absolutely natural when you go through Indian knowledge systems in some little depth. National integration, we've been talking about it since independence. And again, this was complete lip service. I made a small test one day asking students of Tamil Nadu whether anybody could mention the name of, let's say, one great author from Kerala, just a neighboring state. I was not asking from Gujarat or Uttar Pradesh. I would say, you know, your neighboring state, Kerala, do you know any of you can you simply mention one great author, whether ancient or classical or even recent or even contemporary, and you will not get a single answer most of the time, okay, unless a Kerala student happens to be there. Even then, you might not get any sort of answer. So if we look at the Indian knowledge systems, they all cut across Indian boundaries and sometimes beyond, of course. And you get this sense of pan-Indianness in each and every of them. So this is a very important contribution. These are kind of byproducts of Indian knowledge systems. Sense of aesthetics, completely lost. There is very little poor appreciation of ancient Indians, of concepts of beauty and aesthetics. You know, we keep repeating Satyam Shivam Sundaram, but the Sundaram is totally out of the window. And it's no longer part of our lives and no longer part of our consideration. Just look at our cities, look at our buildings, and you will understand what I mean. So this is something that Indian arts, and they are very much parts of the Indian knowledge systems, should and will reintegrate if they are properly present in the education system. Appreciation for heritage and the importance of preserving it. Of course, we will become sensitized to this. And finally, the cultural values. We speak of value education again. It is a kind of hollow moral teaching most of the time. We do not, and we of course complain that, you know, ethics is going down the drain, that we've lost all moral values, etc. But then we don't want to address the cause. And the cause is that very simply in Indian knowledge systems, you don't have to teach values separately. They are all over the place. They will be naturally embedded, of course, especially in literature, but you will find them again everywhere. And in the arts, even in mathematics, if you wish. So these values have to be imparted, but not as a kind of moral teaching that students usually end up resenting, but as part of life, as part of the whole living knowledge of the land. And in specific fields, but basically all of them, I'm just highlighting those where it is more obvious, like governance, Ayurveda, agriculture, water management, environmental protection, the arts, spirituality, that is what I prefer to call self-exploration, self-discovery. You can still, and you do have, very critical contributions from Indian knowledge systems. So it's not at all as if they are obsolete. You see, even in mathematics, of course, nobody would compare the mathematics of an Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta with what is being done today. The field has expanded 1,000,000 times. So there is no comparison. And yet you can sometimes still draw some inspiration. For example, the Fields Medal awardee, Manjul Bhargava, explains in many lectures, you can find them on YouTube, how he derived inspiration in some of his own mathematical work from ancient mathematicians like Brahmagupta and Hemachandra. And some of their procedures were so different, so fresh in a way that he could draw an idea from there and applying to his field. His field, again, is 1,000,000 times vaster, but some of the problems are the same. So even there, even in fields where the relevance is not immediately obvious, we need not rule it out either. So now I want to close this talk with a few more personal observations based on my experience, as I said, where I first of all conducted for NCERT, this was in 2005, I conducted a survey of 11,000 students across India, and where we asked them a lot of questions about not only the whole education system, but also its cultural content. So the survey was called a survey of cultural content in Indian education. And the report is available on my academia page, the full report, you can access it. And you can see that at some point we correlated all questions having to do with Indian culture. And we saw that altogether between students who show a substantial degree of interest in Indian culture, we reach a number of 83%. And if it is just really interested, then it will be 48%. So which means that even this, potential of interest, this pool of interest is not being addressed. We are not doing justice to it. Let me continue now with, so this is in fact one of the highlights, which I published this paper in the NCERT Journal of Value Education, where I drew all the conclusions and suggestions coming from the voice of students directly. So this was a very interesting exercise. And I'm glad that some of those ideas have ultimately found their way into the national education policy. Many of the changes that the policy is calling for are actually somewhat expressed here in the voice of the students themselves. Personally, so this is one thing which I did. Then I had the privilege, and I will be spending a few last minutes on this, of working with Professor Kapil Kapoor, Professor Jagbir Singh Ji, and a few scholars on this CBSE elective course, Knowledge, Traditions and Practices of India. I'll show it in a minute. Let me return to it very shortly. Then also I've been promoting courses at IIT Gandhi Nagar and earlier at various other institutions on aspects of Indian civilization, knowledge systems. We have, in fact, this is the last bullet here, a multi-instructor course running on Indian knowledge systems, and you can see 5 years of recorded lectures by very distinguished scholars on a variety of themes. We're changing the theme every year. Next semester, it will be on India's treasure house of literatures. So this is some of the things I've been doing and contributing to the national education policy, where I made a presentation to the committee, Kasturi Rangan committee that was preparing it, on Indian knowledge systems and the need to integrate them. This was with Professor Ramasubramaniam of IIT Bombay. Finally, at the moment, there is a National Steering Committee for the Development of Curriculum Frameworks, which was created by the government. I happen to be a member of it, again under Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and we are hoping to now give a very clear vision of what those frameworks should be in school education, higher education, adult education, and teacher education. So there's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully something will change. This is the ultimate objective. So this is this course that we prepared with Professor Kapil Kapoor, and where we had all these modules, where this was for class 11, and the course is still running, but we are trying to now improve upon it. And these are the modules for class 12. And I think, yes, that's it. And these modules presented a bird's eye view of every field, followed by, and this was very important, it was an idea of Professor Kapil Kapoor, followed by a selection from primary sources, original sources, not in Sanskrit or Indian languages, in English, of course, but students could get to read directly, a little bit of Kautilya, a little bit of Aryabhatta, a little bit of Kalidasa, and so on. So we carefully selected extracts in all these fields where they could, or Sushruta, or, and so on. So this was a very significant attempt. The modules are available on the CBSE website. Those who would like to see the complete PDF files of the 2 volumes can write to me. I will make them available through Dr. Richaji if necessary. And this is something that has, though it has been difficult to promote it in government schools for various reasons I will not go into, but a lot of private schools were happy to adopt it and sometimes adapt it. Like they would use only a few of the modules, which is absolutely fine. And they were happy that at least some material existed. So now one of the big projects on the anvil is to try to upgrade this to the university level. We are working on this, or we will be, I hope, working on this shortly. So this is a very brief bird's eye view of my perspective of the topic, what I've tried to do personally, and the whole big question in front of us: how do we make up for these lost 7 decades of Indian education? Thank you very much for your attention. If some of you have points, questions you'd like to discuss, I believe we have 10 minutes. We can make use of this.
Thank you so much, Professor Danino. I'm sure there would be many questions, and the chat is now enabled. So either we could have the questions on the chat, or the participants could one by one unmute themselves and ask the question. Dr. Mansi Chaudhary ji says, very informative session. Yes. Could we have the questions, please? And if you would like to unmute yourself and start, please. Rajiv Ranjanji, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have. Thank you.
Yes. Could we spotlight Rajivji? Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you, Professor Danino, for such a informative session. What I would like to ask is, how do you see mythology as an episteme in value education? Your views on that?
First of all, the totality of the field is so vast that we should be selective. We cannot teach everything. Already the curriculums are overburdened. So one challenge, very practical challenge, is going to be whether at school or university level, how do we make space for these Indian knowledge systems? Now, mythology in India is part of many systems. You will find it even in mathematics. There is a system called Bhuta Sankhya, for example, of using mythological concepts to code numbers. For example, Rama in mathematics will mean 3, because you have 3 Ramas. You have Ramachandra, Balarama, and Parashurama. So Rama, it's a mythological element, which simply means the number 3, nothing else. So, and so on. So mythology is present in a lot of, and including this Itihasa tradition, which we keep misunderstanding because we keep wanting it to be pure modern history. It's not that. And then there's a heavy dose of mythology coming into, and of course, across the whole literature. So I feel personally that it's best to not try to teach it as a separate discipline, certainly not, but show how, for example, in nature conservation, you see, how elements of nature are mythologized. So you will associate, a mountain or a river with all kinds of, the whole story of Ganga, if you wish, with all kinds of mythological elements. Use this as an illustration, simply to show the kind of, reverence that ancients were having for such elements of nature. And so use it in all the fields, but kind of, by the way, not centrally, because then it will, first of all, invite a lot of criticism, and secondly, you can't do everything. So as a very kind of living illustration, you can introduce elements from mythology, but I would not personally try to teach it. That would be for, students of philosophy. Then yes, they should study mythology very much, but otherwise I would not. I can see in the chat box that someone is asking, how do you place the missionary institutions in the resurgence of IKS? Well, I don't place them. It's up to them to place themselves if they wish. And, missionary institutions have been, like others, have been both good and bad. There has been often a tendency to promote those colonial stereotypes much more prominently than in other institutions. And I've seen people coming out of those, convent schools, for example, very polished, very intellectually alert, but also very full of serious prejudices. So, I just wish they will flow along and understand that they can be of service in this effort, but ultimately it'll be up to them. Then someone, Sagar Gawande, if I'm not mispronouncing your name, asks which country in the world is rich in knowledge assets. See, the simple answer is potentially all of them. And certainly all ancient civilizations have produced enormous knowledge. We all, building upon the past. So you look at the ancient Chinese or Egyptian or Mesopotamian or Greek or Arabian civilization, and you will find a huge amount of knowledge there. And we should have glimpses of some of it. So even when here, for example, I teach a course on Introduction to the History of Science and Technology, I start with the other civilizations and then I come to India. Of course, the first part is very brief. It's just a glimpse. You, again, cannot do everything. So there's no need to compare if that is your intention. There's no need to say India had more knowledge than other cultures or civilization. Lead the students to their own conclusions. If they want to conclude, just present the food, present the thali, and let them taste at least some of the dishes on the thali, and then they will enjoy. And this is, to me, what matters. I'm not very interested in saying, India had more knowledge than this other culture, or was the first to do this. Sometimes it may be true, sometimes it may not. It doesn't really matter at the end. What would you think of ancient Indian architecture? Asks Dr. Suman Gupta. Why should I think anything about it? It's there in front of us. We just have to look at it, learn how to understand it, how to not only admire the beauty, but the whole philosophy behind, all the concepts behind. So, again, it's about not just remembering facts that, the Brihadishwar temple in Tanjavur has a vimana of 67 meters. That doesn't really matter. What is the concept behind the vimana? What is a vimana? What is a shikhar? What does it represent in terms of a human body, in terms of the whole universe, and so on? This is, to me, more interesting. So this should figure. And there are some NCERT textbooks that try to have a few elements of architecture, but it's not very satisfactory. Dr. Nisha Pandey asks, give your thought to sensitize students about Indian knowledge and its impact in business management. Yes, I didn't have time to touch upon this. I would take a shortcut here. You have a book. Here we are lucky that there is material. It's called Indian Systems of Economics, Business and Management. It's by Professor Kanaga Sabapati, who is presently the acting chairperson of ICSSR. And he taught himself finance and economics for decades. And he wrote this book on precisely the Indian knowledge systems in economics, in business, in management, and how they can inspire. And I can see at least that a lot of Indian institutes of management are trying to grab thoughts from Arthashastra, from ancient traditions and practices of business, there's quite a bit of documentation on all this. So I think if you refer to this textbook, you will have a lot of ideas. And it is feasible. There is a lot of potential for integration there. Professor Pankaj Gupta asks, earlier, self-awareness, self-discovery, fulfillment, inner journey, restfulness were an integral part of mythology, which led to a holistic development and great outcomes. Yes, certainly. Now it is not so, and we worship more of avidya these days, of course. How can this be brought back in and given its due place in the curriculum and pedagogy? Well, this is the entire challenge, in fact. I think personally that we have, in ancient India, this very clear distinction between inner knowledge and outer knowledge, the inner development of the student through certain qualities like patience, concentration, sincerity, dedication, self-discipline, and so on. These are all listed in the ancient India very explicitly. And then there's all the outer knowledge, like learning about the philosophical systems, the sciences, medicine, and so on and so forth, economics, accounting, and whatnot, a lot of skills also. So to me, I find it easier with our students of today to often start with the outer achievements, the outer accomplishments, the outer disciplines, because these are things that they can immediately relate to. When we speak of water structures, or we speak of metallurgy in ancient India, why has the Delhi iron pillar not rusted over 1600 years? These are things that they can immediately relate to. And it's a way to draw them into the deeper concepts at work. So I would, though I know that many people would prefer to start from the conceptual foundations, I find that students are a little bit, in terms of pedagogy, a little bit, reluctant. They say, oh, they are again going to preach to us, and what's the use of all this, and so on. So show them first the use, and then you move backward. This is at least my approach. That's all I can say. Mansi Chaudhary says that it's time we realize our basic roots. Yes, of course, indeed. And we belong to rich Indian culture and should be proud of it, yes. What percentage of a paper can be IKS-related material to integrate in IKS? I'm not sure I understand your question, Dr. Rajat Pradhan. If you can reformulate it a little more clearly, I can come back to it later. And yes, so I'll only take one more question perhaps, because time is up. Dr. Krishna Gopal says, what challenges should be there while implementing such courses in school education? So the main challenge is going to be, make it really fascinating. Don't teach this the way, today, geography or mathematics or all these disciplines are taught. Because they will resent it all the more. Already students are resenting anyway school education. They do it because they're obliged to, it's compulsion most of the time. There are exceptional schools, there are exceptional teachers, there are exceptional students, of course. I'm talking about the average Indian scene. So there, there's a massive failure of pedagogy. How do you make a topic, whatever it may be, how do you make it really interesting and captivating? So you need to do a lot of research yourself. This is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is teacher training, creating, and again, we have, lost generations of teachers. So first of all, create the teachers. That's going to be the challenge number one. And therefore, I'm glad that this National Steering Committee has among its curriculums to be framed, there's teacher education. That has to be completely thought afresh. So make it entertaining, take a few facts from here or there. Genuineness is very, very important. This is another challenge. A lot of people take shortcuts. They just Google, they land on any website, and half of what they bring up together, and I keep seeing those presentations all the time, those YouTube videos all the time, and it's very disheartening how few people are willing to put in effort to gather very genuine material. and how many shortcuts we take to just glorify and get a kind of, very ephemeral feel good, which doesn't serve any purpose, doesn't build any knowledge. So these are some of the two challenges I'm glad that I had an opportunity to highlight. And thank you, Dr. Krishna Gopal. So I think that, well, thank you for the other remarks. Dr. Pradhan finally asks, what percentage of, I meant a paper in CBSE syllabus at UG or PG level. See, these are things to be worked out, Dr. Pradhan. I don't think we need to be bothered about this at this stage. The question is, are we going to teach IKS as a separate paper, separate discipline? Or are we going to try to, that's the first question, which will give the answer to your question later on. So, for example, we teach mathematics. Should we integrate some background of Indian mathematics right there? Or should we teach ancient Indian mathematics as a separate topic? I'm in favor of the first. I'm in favor of integration. Then the answer will follow naturally. In each system, it will work out its own. So I'm in favor of not, though we had to do it in this CBSE course, for example, because there was nothing. So we had to do it as a separate course. But ideally, that's not the solution. Ideally, you teach economics, well, start from Kautilya or something, and start from there and build it up. You teach, geography. You can have a look at, the ancient geography, for example, from Mahabharata. There is a lot of ancient Indian geography there, and so on. So this, to me, is the third big challenge that we have to face. With this, I will thank Dr. Richaji again and all of you for your kind attention, and I will leave the space to the next speaker, who happens to be a good friend I've been also associated with, Arundhati ji. Namaste, and thank you all.
Pranam, Michel ji, and we would request Shri Hari Vittal ji to conclude the session with a prayer. And